quite warm today. Hi, it is your favorite nobody. um, I guess if you use internet and watch TV or care for any news at all, you may have noticed that over the last few years, unrest has been a big part of many places around the world. The UK is no exception. And the latest wave of anger and disillusionment and frustration and pain and confusion and just pure meanness for the sake of being mean has left many people wondering why, how is it possible that in the 21st century, in the year 2024, we are still talking about race and gender and religion and war. Again, when I was growing up, I thought to myself, my goodness me, there are so many interesting things happening. Like the first time somebody hinted that maybe in 2014 we'll see a moon base or another landing on Mars or some other crazy stuff with computers and networking. And here I am, here we are, 2024. And you see that a lot of society is stuck. A great, very many are suffering or causing suffering for things that should no longer be part of the daily discourse, I think. I don't think it's difficult to tell that I am not originally from the UK. You can probably tell by the accent, by how I look. You can probably tell that I'm not particularly very religious, that I am somewhat well read. I'm not very well traveled. You can probably tell that my sexual orientation is heterosexual. You can probably tell all of that just by looking at me. And you can definitely surmise, based on what you've seen in this channel, that I have no difficulty finding a partner or figuring out the meaning of life. You know, no, the sad truth is, I do understand why people upset with foreigners are upset with foreigners. And there are way too many reasons to list. But I think the important bits to just remind everyone, and to remind myself time and again, is that there is a difference between a causality and correlation. And also, there is a different way of interpreting reality, which we do all the time. And there's a different way to look at all of it, which I like to which I like to delineate, if you will, or split into three main categories. To me, reality is objective, subjective, and intersubjective. And I've shared this before, probably. And to me, objective reality is the reality of this universe. It's the reality which we're comprised of. It's the reality we are a part of. It's the reality that's quantifiable, it's measurable, it's the reality which is provable with experimentation, with testing. It's the hard limitations, it's the frame, it's the outlines, and again, everything in between. To me, that's objective reality. It's beyond us. It's us and beyond us. And then subjective reality is the reality of individuals. My reality as a migrant, as a Bulgarian national who has somehow never really cared about his country or nationalism in general, who's always looked outwards, always looked out beyond his hometown, beyond municipality, beyond the borders, beyond the confines of his planet. And then you have the reality of somebody else, who was born in some part of the UK, in a different family, with their own story, and their own expectations, and their own struggles, and their own beliefs, and their own good things and bad things, And then the third type of reality is the intersubjective one. It's the stories we tell each other, the stories about nations, about flags, about currency, about religion, about cuisine, you name it. Everything that we say to one another that doesn't necessarily need to have any anchoring in objective reality whatsoever. That is intersubjective reality, as in the simplest example, beaten to death now. Money doesn't have value. It has no value at all. But we've been telling this story for so long that money has value, that it's become inextricable from our reality. Even though, again, money has no value. You can't do anything with money, practically. There is nothing you can do. Like if you had the physical cash or even the virtual cash, and if you had to use it to make clothes, buildings, food for yourself, just using that as material, you wouldn't be able to. So material reality, objective reality, to me, is the anchor. It's the one thing that I look to when I feel a bit of anxiety and a bit of fear that I may be going in too abstract a space, or if I feel a bit disconnected, discombobulated, I try and find my way back to the basics. And if you can't accept this, and if you can't think about the difference between causality and correlation, it is very difficult to not feel the way people felt during these protests, or the way soldiers feel in wars and so on. It's just difficult to change that. It's fundamentals that are not logical, and I don't think they are an evolutionary anything to anyone. It's a practice. It is effort. It's conscious effort to think. And it's easier to emote, to react. And there is another thing I just want to mention, and that is I've had my fair share of hardship in the last 17 years in the UK. I've tried my best to be a good person, but I know I've not always been up to it. um, I've had I've had years of I've spent years in self isolation, um, and in apathy and depression. There was a time when I was suicidal. In Again, I had to witness my own parents struggling, uh, friends and family passing away without me being there. Again, we've been through a lot. I've slept on the ground. I've lived in, I've shared a house with 11 strangers. I've worked all kinds of jobs. So again, it's a fair bit of life I've lived in the UK. But through it all, it wasn't logic also. Sorry, it wasn't logic alone, or this example of the kinds of reality and causality versus correlation, but also the support that came from family and friends. Without them, I don't think I would have managed. I don't think I would have managed. And therein lies the problem. If you're surrounded and feel loved and appreciated, you almost have no reason to be angry in your daily life. You just don't feel anger. You might feel indignation. You might feel like some kind of injustice was done sometime. You might get a bit worked up about the sports result or something, or maybe some work issue. But more often than not, you wouldn't be as angry and as mean as the folks you saw in those protests. Not the protests that were far right, but the extreme protests against foreigners, against migrants, against reality itself. And I think that's a whole nother can of worms to deal with. I think, based on what I've observed and read throughout, and seen on TV, a lot of young people in the UK struggle with finding meaning, with finding jobs, especially men. The country has very high rates of suicides amongst male people. Men. And yeah, if you live in a family where dysfunction is part of daily life, if anger and bile are part of daily life, if somebody tells you every single day that all the misery you feel is because of somebody else, obviously you won't look within. You won't start reading Buddhism the way I did, or look at philosophy books, and Stoicism and the likes, or start reading non-fiction and biographies. No, you will continue feeding that fire. It's what you know, and then anger is the result. And there is no stopping that. Only time. A lot of time, a lot of life needs to be lived in order for a young person to see through a lot of this rubbish, a lot of the noise. I think that's the sad thing about, the sad and the good thing about aging is that you will become very selective about things. if you haven't reached that age yet. Soon you will start, especially if you're in your teens, now your mind is open to everything and you fill your head with nonsense. But as you grow older, you just won't have capacity for that. And some of that anger will be quelled. But it's unpredictable, it's unreliable. There's a lot of work to be done, I think, in this regard, and I wouldn't even know where to begin. Personally, I wouldn't even know. So if you feel anger bubbling up, if you feel like somebody else is at fault for how you feel, if you feel violent tendencies, talk to someone. But ideally not somebody close to you. Find a way to talk to somebody. Somebody who is good at listening, somebody who understands people, somebody who maybe even has professional experience. And I'm not plugging anything. Again, I found my own help through a GP, my GP, and then because I get private healthcare these days, I've used that as well with mixed results. But yeah, again, communication and time are absolutely vital for this. But then again, if you're listening to the video, you're probably the wrong crowd entirely. Yeah, that is all I have to say for now. It's a broad subject. I don't want to go into detail. All I know is I used to be angry myself. And that's because I just never looked after myself. I was never kind to myself. I still am not very kind to myself. And I didn't see all the love and attention and care people were throwing my way. And over the last few years, that's changed. I hope it changes for you as well if you're suffering with this. And yeah, I'll see you in another video. Thanks for watching.